We just learned about absolute value, and this lesson is about opposites, and quite often we use the opposite in conjunction with the absolute value. So the opposite value is simply the same value with the opposite sign. We would denote that with just a negative in front. So for instance, this value of A at -5, the opposite of -5 is point B at +5. These two are opposites. They're the same distance from 0, but they have the opposite sign, so they're opposite sides of 0. So note down here, to denote the opposite value of A, we would just put a negative in front of it to tell us to change the sign. So let's take a look. A -3. So the opposite of 3 is what they're telling us to do, which means it would be -3. So this is the opposite of 3. This is the opposite of -5. So you can think of it a couple of different ways. You can say, well, this is the opposite of -5, and so therefore it would be +5. Quite often you will see us use our KFC, keep, flip, change. So if there were a term here, we would keep it. We would flip minus to plus and change the sign, and so that would make it a +5. And our last one, the opposite of 0. This is that tricky one. There is no such thing as -0, and so that would be 0, no matter what. Here are a few for us to try that include absolute values as well. So now this is different because I can't KFC this and turn them into positives, because inside I have to actually find the absolute value of -3 before I take the opposite of it. So I'm going to say that this is the negative of what is the absolute value of -3? It's +3. But notice I haven't used this negative on the outside. It's almost like I have a -1 out here that I'm going to multiply by the absolute value of -3. So the absolute value of -3 was 3, and now I'm going to keep that negative, and so my answer is -3. Same thing is going to happen on my second question. Again, think of this as a -1 on the outside. The absolute value of 5 is 5. And now they're asking me to take the opposite of it, and so the opposite of that is -5. And this last one, the absolute value of 4 is 4, and there's no negatives anywhere to worry about, and so my answer is 4. Here are 3 for you to try. Note that I put a few in absolute value brackets and a few that were not, so be very, very careful. So press pause, try all 3, then press play to see how you did. For my first, I have the absolute value of -8. Remember, absolute value tells us to find the positive distance from 0 on the number line, which would give me +8. There's no negative on the outside that's telling me to do the opposite, so my answer is 8. For my second question, again, think of this as a -1 on the outside. So I essentially have -1 times whatever the absolute value of -4 is, which is +4. If I multiply those, I get my answer of -4. And my last one, see, this one had the absolute value brackets. This one does not. So they're saying the opposite of -3, which is of course +3, or you can keep, flip, change, or ching ching to make it +3 or +3.